mode.
Hello, thank you for joining us today. I'm Stephen Nichols. I'm the Director of Business Development for Mission Critical Systems. I'm joined today by Ginny Doris.
Good morning.
We're going to be talking about SharePoint 2013 and some of the ways that businesses here in Denver are using it to be more collaborative and be more efficient and effective in moving information around and communicating. So we'll go through a few different slides for this. I guess we have muted everyone on the call. We have a number of people on the call, and GoToWebinar tends to slow down if we let everyone's audio go through. So if you want to ask a question, please do ask that question, but use the chat or the questions field as a portion of GoToWebinar, and we'll get to those questions probably at the end of the broadcast once we've completed all the information. So please do ask questions if you're able to. So we're talking about SharePoint, and I think most people have used SharePoint or heard of it a little bit. It's a very quickly growing, very popular program. Right now, 78% of Fortune 500 companies have SharePoint. 1 in every 5 knowledge workers has access to SharePoint, and every day about 20,000 people adopt it. We've seen it personally here in Mission Critical Systems go from being kind of a side product to our primary product. We do a ton of work in SharePoint at this point in terms of development, training, and everything in between the two of those.
So let's talk a little bit, too, about some of the SharePoint features that are out there. What are some of the key reasons that people are actually going to SharePoint? So it offers a lot of things that are attractive to businesses. The first is collaboration. You know, a lot of us now work outside of our main office or have people that are spread across multiple offices. So how do we enable collaboration, and what kind of tools can we use? And SharePoint's the perfect solution. It has lots of collaboration components to it that you can use and collaborate even when you're not in the same location. And we'll look at some of those today. Also, it has document management, and we have so many documents now in our life, thousands of them, if not millions of them. And the tough thing is, how do we access those documents and find what we need quickly and be able to utilize all that business intelligence? And so the only way we can do that is by having a good document management system. And so we'll talk about today how SharePoint can do that. Also, being able to approve and manage the content in documents as well as workflows to route information or processes or documents around are critical in companies. So much of it is done manually or used to be done manually, and we need better ways to automate that. So SharePoint can do that for us as well. Also, we have a lot of clients that call us about project management needs. You know, they don't want to use Microsoft Project because if they use that, then everyone else that needs to see stuff needs Project, or they just don't want to learn it because it can be a more complicated tool. They just want some simple project management that they can then have everyone leverage. And SharePoint's a great way to do that. Without even having to have Project Server, you can do a lot of project management within SharePoint itself. And then lastly is business intelligence. A lot of companies want to be able to analyze all of their data. And so SharePoint has the ability to create interactive graphs and charts and analysis tools that will show you your data in real time in a visual way.
Yeah, we've definitely seen a lot of traction with business intelligence over the past few weeks, few months actually.
Absolutely.
A lot of clients are asking us for that. Our business, I guess, with SharePoint is really end-to-end. We do deployment work in terms of installing SharePoint Server, or using Office 365, hosting.com, or our own Mission Critical Systems Thunderhead Cloud hosted solution for SharePoint. And we do a lot of just deployment back-end work that has to be there to set up the framework for the site. We do development work too in terms of business tools, design, just implementing collaboration spaces and just applying it to businesses, all the things we've listed in the previous slide. And then end-user adoption, of course, too. The key of that is definitely training. We do training on every level, from the IT administrator managing the back end all the way through the end user, just needing to upload documents and just interact with the site.
Great.
That's the business for Mission Critical Systems.
So now let's actually take a look at SharePoint and look through all of this stuff. So when we talk about SharePoint, you know, people ask me all the time, why is SharePoint so popular? Why is it really taken off out there? And I would say there's 2 key reasons why SharePoint has become so popular. The first is that it is just basically a web platform. That means you can do almost anything with it you want. You can, it depends how much customization you want, but you can make it do anything. If you go to Ferrari.com or Remax.com right now online, both of those are SharePoint sites. You'd never know it. They don't look a thing like it, but Remax manages all of its realtors across the entire nation by using SharePoint. So there, it's pretty robust what you can do with it. However, another key reason why it's so popular is that you can also put it in the hands of the business users to create their own sites. You don't need to know HTML and CSS to do the most basic functions. Everybody can then build their own sites, maintain their own sites. That way, it's not managed by IT. You can let it be managed by the different departments and business users to create something that works for them. So when you look at a SharePoint site, as we've got up here, you'll notice across the top we have what's called the top link bar, and these are generally different subsites. They might be departments, they might be different areas in the company, and then usually down the left-hand side you have a quick launch menu, and that's usually different content that's on the site. And so Stephen's going to talk a little bit about some of the content that we have on a SharePoint site.
Yeah, this is an example of the home page for a company that might use SharePoint, just for general collaboration kinds of things. The interesting thing with SharePoint is that we typically put out, home pages, just some regular template pages, and introduce IT, introduce the key business users to how to use SharePoint, and then we see a few months later a level of innovation that happens where the end users have started to use SharePoint, and they have little problems or little inefficiencies that they know about, but no one in IT knows about it. Maybe their managers even don't know about them, just because they're the small issues that kind of go unresolved and people have workarounds for them. But when you give users the ability to use SharePoint or a tool like that, they're able to innovate themselves and come up with solutions, IT solutions, that are on such a low level that IT is really not going to get involved with that. And that's where we typically get called back into projects 3 or 4 months after they've launched, because those users have started to think of different ways to use SharePoint and things that managers can't think of. So this is an example of a home page for it. You'll notice a couple of elements to it. As Jenny said, there's links at the top for all the different sites that are involved in the SharePoint site. I also have links on the side with some useful information. And really, every site is going to be customized. For some people, a human resources page or a project page might not be very useful, so of course we'll customize exactly the content that's going to be pertinent for your users. For this company, a calendar, I guess, is very important, so it's taking up a lot of the real estate of this home page. You can see different events to that. I'll click on this. It allows you to see just one page for just this calendar. And if I want more information about one of these events, I can click on that. It'll think for a second and pull up the details for that event. And then I can, let me hit the back button here. I can make edits to it. I can change it. I can also add by using this button here. It'll think for a second. Type in the title.
The nice thing is these fields are what your users are already used to in Outlook, so there's a low learning curve for them to actually utilize the stuff on the site.
Yeah, it's all a web interface, so people tend to adopt it very quickly. I'll create a category for it. It's going to be a human resources event. Hit save, and it'll come back up on the calendar for that. So this could be a company calendar. It could be a project calendar. It could be a department level calendar. It could be a lot of different kinds of calendars. But it's fairly easy to interact with the site and make adjustments to that. I'll go back to the main page. I'll see a company announcements list. So this could be, this has actually been kind of popular for us. A lot of companies have really wanted to have an announcement list where they can say, hey, we just, landed that big deal, or so-and-so's birthday, or something like that. It's actually very easy to use too. You click on new announcement there, and just type in the announcement that you want to have in there. And it shows up, and that's going to be a permissions level thing. So maybe every user is not able to put an announcement that everyone can see. But however it's set up, you can have that work out. I have an emergency contact list over on the side here too. And I can run that. Now it's interesting here. You'll see a bigger list of, I have 6 individuals here. And I can do things like sorting by what department they're going to belong to. A to top or Z to top. Or I can choose just administration people, delivery, sales, that kind of thing. So it's a sorted list that is used in SharePoint, used very commonly in SharePoint. You see it quite a bit. But you'll notice that we have 6 clients here, and then if I go back to the home page, this is the emergency contact list that only shows 3. So it's the first of what we'll show a number of times in this demonstration of a filtered view. You have a big list of items, or a big calendar, or a big list of documents, or whatever it is, and then I can surface that on a certain page with just a filtered view of just showing certain contacts or whatever it is, based on the criteria that I want. So emergency contacts are important. You'll need to get access to those right away. You don't want to go fishing around the site if you have an emergency, so it makes sense to have these guys on the front page for this company.
And I'd say views are probably one of the most powerful things about SharePoint, because you can't do that with a lot of websites.
That's right, absolutely. Useful links here too. These can be external, these can be internal links, whatever you like. And then a discussion board. And in this case, I have a couple of kind of silly discussions for it, but These could be anything that I guess the company-wide needs to discuss, or a discussion board could be just pertaining to a specific product or a client project, any kind of object of collaboration you might have. So that's the home page for that. I'm going to click on the Human Resources page too and show how a department might use this to become more efficient. For Human Resources, I know a lot of HR departments are inundated with questions constantly about when benefits forms are due, what changes there are, where's the new employee manual, and they end up doing a lot of emails back and forth with their employees. In this case, the Human Resources Department created what we'd call an internal page that's kind of externally facing outside of the department. So if I'm working in a different department, I'm an accounting person or something like that, I can go into the frequently asked questions section, and I can expand these out and read the questions there and read the answers for that. And a lot of HR departments end up answering the same question over and over and over, so that might be a good place to hide that or to display that information. I also have HR documents, and I can do things like sorting by function, choosing just general HR, policies and procedures, that kind of thing. But then I can open up any of these documents and read about that. I can also have links to an external site. So a lot of HR companies have a link to the healthcare site or the open enrollment or that kind of thing. And you can also link to all those pages. And then you'll notice also here there's a company calendar, and this is kind of interesting too. It's a filtered view of the company calendar. This is only showing the human resources events that are coming up. So it doesn't show sales events or general events or the other kinds of things. So this is actually the exact same calendar that you would see, I'll go back to it, on the home page of the site. But you see on the home page of the site I have many more events than I have on the human resources page. So I'm using the same calendar, the same web part, that's the terminology in SharePoint, and I'm only displaying certain parts that pertain to that. And so that's kind of interesting for human resources pages.
Again, it goes back to that power of all those views that you can use.
Right, absolutely. I'll go into the sales page too and show how a department might use this for internal collaboration. So the sales page, this is probably not useful to someone in accounting or someone in HR, but it's certainly useful to all the salespeople. I have a few people listed here at the top who could be salespeople in this fictional company. You'll notice one of the things here is a list. It's a 90-day forecast list. And if I click on that, it'll give me an expanded view of all the different deals, I guess, or projects that are being talked about with clients right now. And I can add items fairly easily there. I can edit items, that kind of thing. I can also go through and I can filter these lists by choosing the widgets or projects or gadgets that these companies are looking at. So that's kind of useful to be able to look at all of that and get a nice sum of what's working. I also have these links at the top that link to saved views. So basically I have a big list of documents and I only want to look at a certain section of them in the 90-day forecast, so I can click on that and it'll quickly jump to that. Or if I'm only interested in the projects that are in production, I can click on that and it'll only show those things that are in production for me. Or if I want all items, I can go back to that. And it's interesting. It's a way of interacting with the data that SharePoint allows that a lot of other intranet programs don't allow that kind of access for it. So that's been very useful. I'll go back to the general sales page. I have some links to I have some links to some other pages here too, and I have marketing materials down at the bottom, so I can have quick access to all of those marketing materials that I might need to. So then that's going to be a general sales page. Let's say I'm Mal and I just want to look at the information that pertains to me. In this case, I have a forecast, and this forecast is limited to just my projects that I'm working on, because that's all that I care about. I also have a list of projects over here, and we'll get into those in a little while. Those are projects that are currently working, and I need to keep up with those projects and make sure my clients are being serviced and that kind of thing. I have the marketing materials list down there, because those are obviously very useful to me. And then I have a client documents list. And this is, I'm going to get into the document management conversation, and of course, Jenny will take over that.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about document management, because that's one of the critical things in businesses now with all the information we have going around. So, we're looking at documents like you would have right now in a shared drive, but you'll notice one thing that's missing. We don't have any folders. And I know that Microsoft has done a good job of beating into our head the fact that we need folders to organize things, or how the hell else are we going to find anything? So basically, the nice thing here is that you don't need folders to find things. You can get rid of that whole folder structure. That was the old school way. This is the new school way. So basically, I could have a list of, 5,000 documents and still get exactly to the document in just a couple clicks. So for example, if I only want to see documents that are relevant to Mal, I can come over here to the rep, click a drop down and choose Mal. And then close it, and now I only have Mal's documents. Or let's say I want to filter even further. I want to see things that are actual proposals that he's working on, so I'm going to filter again and just choose proposals. So now that quickly gets me down to just 4 key documents. So this allows you to ask smarter questions than if you were going to have folders. If you think now about your shared files and you have to go to a folder and then you got to click to go into another subfolder and then another subfolder, and you think about that tree and how everything's organized, sometimes there's a lot of clicks back and forth to get to exactly what you need. You have to go into subfolders and subfolders. In this case, you just click a couple drop downs and you can pull everything out exactly how you want to see it. So it allows you a little bit more flexibility. And when you save a document, it's pretty easy, and I'll show you here. I'm just going to show you what the properties look like. Whenever you upload a new document, you're basically going to get this pop-up screen that will say, okay, you're going to upload this document, fill out this information, type in the client, go ahead and choose who the sales rep is, and then go ahead and choose the document type. This is a proposal. And then you want to choose what products it represents. That's it. Then you save it into the system, and it's all tagged with that information. It's a lot easier than having to drill down into 15 folders to find where to save it.
And of course, that metadata that you're filling out there is going to be specific to the document library and to the customer that's using SharePoint. So you may have totally different information. Maybe rep doesn't apply for your document library or for your company at all. And so that can be customized to whatever metadata is important to you guys.
Yeah, so it's completely customizable for every company. And then the nice thing is this is all searchable as well. And so I will talk about searching here in a little bit, but just wanted to show you a couple other things about document libraries. So I'm going to go to another document library here, and this one I have metadata as well, you'll notice, but I also have something that's turned on that's called versioning. So if you think about a old file share system, which most people are currently using, and how we do different versions of documents. Most people will save them as draft 1, draft 2, draft 3, or draft and then the date, or version 1, 2, 3. They'll have to put it all in the name. The problem with that is if you're looking through a list of documents, oftentimes draft 11 is going to show up before draft 2. So it's very easy for people to grab the wrong document. So you're never 100% confident that you're working with the latest and greatest. What happens here in SharePoint is when you do versioning, everything travels together. As you create a document and make any changes, it automatically creates a new version every time. So then what happens is if anyone comes in here, if I want to get this Mango Tea document, if I click and open it, I'm getting the latest version no matter what. However, all the past versions are stacked underneath it. So I can still access them. If I want to access a past version, I'm going to click on the menu button and then click on the secondary menu button. And there's something here called version history, as long as I have versioning turned on. So I'm going to open this up. And then you'll notice it shows me every time there's been a version created with this document. So in this case, in this library, I have what's turned on called major and minor versions. So this is version 1.0 is where we started, and now we're on 1.1. And I'll talk about that difference in a second. But you'll notice here, if I ever change any properties, it shows me what changed. It shows me who modified it. It also, if I want to put comments when I create a new version, it'll show those. And it'll show the date and time that the version was created. Notice that when I hover on the date and time, I have some options on that drop-down menu. I could view it, I could restore it, or I could unpublish this version. Same thing when I go to this later date option, I could view it or restore it. So let me talk about major and minor versions. You can turn this on and have major and minors or just have majors. So what's good about this is you can set it up so that if you have, let's say, HR, and they have a library of documents that the rest of the company can use, you can set it up so that only HR can see the minor versions. So what that means is if you have, let's say, an employee handbook, if HR decides they need to do updates for 2014, they can be making updates and saving those as minor versions, and no one else can see it. They're still accessing the latest 1.0 version when the general population goes to grab that document. Then when HR is done with their edits, they finally publish it as a major version, as a 2.0, and now everybody automatically gets the updated. So it allows you to work behind the scenes in your library on a document.
We saw a great application with this with one of our customers who at the end of the year would send out a budget document. There's an Excel spreadsheet, and they'd send this out, and what inevitably happened was the first version went out, and it was called, yearly budget final. And then the person who sent that realized they screwed something up and had to make a change to it, so they go back and they'd make an edit to it. So it was called Yearly Budget Final V2.
Or
right?
Final, yeah, right.
Right. And then 6 people would go through and look at it, and they'd all send back to that first poor soul budget V2 .1, .2, .3. So then this person would have to go through and amalgamate all of those changes into one document, and then the process would start over again. And it would be Yearly Budget Final V1, V2, and go like that. With document management in SharePoint, it's a lot easier because you're sending over links to documents. You're not sending over the documents themselves. And what that means is that whenever someone accesses the document, they're accessing the most current version for it. So if I send out a link to everyone to, here's the budget final, and the second I hit send, I realize I screwed something up. I can go back into Excel, I can go back into SharePoint, quickly open the document, make my change to it, and save it, and no one's the wiser. Everyone knows that the change is there.
And also, as Stephen was saying, that you can send links to things. If you click on the menu for any document, you'll notice that there is a link right here. So all you have to do is copy that link, paste it in the email, and send it off to anyone in the company. And when they click on that link, it opens a real live document in SharePoint. They don't have to try to navigate to it. They don't have to figure out where it is. They don't have to figure out how to resave it into the system. They're actually getting the real document within your email. It also saves on email space. You don't have to say, if you've got a, let's say you got a really large 10 meg document. You don't need to email it around. You just email the link. So it'll cut down on all of that Outlook space or those nasty messages you get from IT telling you to delete things from Outlook. So, all right, so let's talk a little bit about searching because, again, we could have 5,000 documents here and we can find them easily with filters, but you can also quickly search everything in SharePoint. So searching in SharePoint, there's lots of cool things. So first of all, let's talk about just a general word search. So if I want to search, I'm going to type in the word agreement. Whoops. And I'm just going to press enter, and it searches my whole site. And it's not only searching the library with documents, it is searching every single thing on the SharePoint site. So it's searching web pages, it's searching discussions, and you'll notice it comes back with 9 results. And if I hover on any of these documents, I get a pop-up here where I could actually open a document, edit it, I could follow it or send it to someone, or I could just click on View Library and it takes me to that full library where the document actually lives. So if it wasn't the document I wanted, but I know it's in the similar library, I can click on that to get to the library. So that's one way. I'm going to also do, let me do another search here to show you what happens when web pages come back in your search. So I'm going to type Caribbean. And this is searching, by the way, the entire site and all of its subsites. So you can narrow your search down by going to a specific area. Right now I'm searching everything in SharePoint. If I only wanted to search a certain library, I would go to that library before I ran my search and do my search from there. So in this case, though, I have some sites that found the word Caribbean on it. So you'll notice here when I hover on this, it pops up a thumbnail over here on the right of the actual site where it lives on. Again, I have documents here. I have lots of different information, and some are discussion boards. And you'll notice at the bottom it says it came back with 162 results. That's a lot of results for me to pick through. So over here on the left-hand side, you'll notice that you also have some taxonomy filters, some categories that you can click to narrow this down. So for example, maybe I know I'm only looking for a Word document. So I might come over here and find Word. That quickly narrowed it down. You'll notice at the bottom I only have 15 results. If I want to narrow it down further, maybe I know I'm looking for a document that I personally created, so I'm going to click on me as the author, and now I got to just one document. So all of those filters will really help you narrow down what you want. You also can use the general Boolean search terms. So if you've ever done Google searches and you ever use and, or, and not, that's Boolean searching. So for example, let's say I'm looking for something with the word Caribbean and the word spice in it. So if I capitalize and in between them, it's going to look for documents that has both of those words. So in this case, it came back with 12 results down here at the bottom. So that's something that I can manage. That's a little bit easier for me to find something. Or let's say that I'm looking for something that has the word Caribbean, but not the word product. So again, it's going to find everything with Caribbean, but that doesn't have the word product. It came back with 149 items. So you can narrow down other ways too. If I know that I'm looking for a document for sure, so let's say I'm looking for a document with the word Caribbean in it, and it's searching not only the title, it's looking in the contents of the document too. So if I know I'm looking for a document, I could actually start my search by typing DOC and then a colon, and then I could type Caribbean and run a search. And now you'll notice, find documents. Came back with 14 documents. And you can do this with a bunch of things. I can search by, I could put the word title here rather than doc. So if I know the title of something, or if I know who the author is, or if I want a certain created date. So for example, let's say I want a document that I know was created, let's say before, I'm going to do this, 5/1 of 2013. And then it comes back with a list of everything created before 5/1 of 2013. So you can use all these different search terms to quickly get to what you want. And it's searching this entire site and all of its sub-content. So it's searching everything, not just a document. It's searching all your content. It does it pretty quickly. So it's a quick way to do it.
A great improvement in SharePoint 2013 over SharePoint 2010. There was something called Fast Search that used to be an additional feature in SharePoint that you had to pay for. Yeah. And they've integrated that now into SharePoint as the basic version, and it really improved the search results remarkably. The interesting thing, we had a customer use SharePoint search once in a very interesting way. This customer acquired businesses, so they had grown very quickly by buying other businesses and bringing them into their fold. But when that happened, of course, there's this big pile of documents that the new company would have on a server somewhere, and they needed to have access to the documents and find them in a very, very quick and reasonable way. With SharePoint, there's something called federated searching, which allows me to index a file server as well as the SharePoint site. So if I execute a search on the SharePoint site, it can also surface results from this file service that could be several states away. Those results can also show up, and I get quick access by clicking on those and opening those documents back up.
And it's a nice way, too, for change management, because a lot of people get worried when they come to SharePoint. They say, okay, should we migrate all our documents off of our shared drive right away, or can we just start new? And so what you can do is you can just start new on SharePoint, lock down the old drives, but still have them show up in searching on SharePoint so that people are really using one interface to get to everything.
Right. You said the old drive is read-only, and then they can find the document through the SharePoint site, so there's training them to use SharePoint to find what they need. And then once they've opened the document, it forces them to save it into the SharePoint site. And that's one of the strategies you can use to get people to adopt SharePoint and without having to go through a big migration project.
Absolutely, yeah. So let's talk, too, about another key thing that we've had a lot of clients call us about, and it's in managing projects. So there's lots of ways you can help manage projects and do it all within SharePoint. So I'm going to come here to a landing board that we have in this company for the current projects that are going on. So they can come in here and they can choose whatever the project they want to go and look at that project information. So let's say I want to come here and I want to look at this project that's ongoing, and it shows me some basic information. So this is kind of a new project. Not too much is happening. We've got a document related to it. But I'm going to come to this other project here. It has a little bit more going on. You'll notice there's some more documents. We have some contact information, some issues that have been happening. And then we've got down here a task list of things that are happening in that project. Now, all of this stuff, the way this one's set up, and again, you can set it up customized for however you want in your company. The way this is working is that we actually have one project task list, one contact list, one document list, and one issue tracking for all projects together. So, for example, if I come here and I want to see all tasks, I click on the task list. This is all tasks for all projects that are going on, so that the project manager of the department can come in and see everything together. The same thing happens for if I want to see all the contacts for all the ongoing projects, or if I want to see all the issues that we've going on for all the projects, or all the documents. So all this stuff is together so that a manager of the department can see it all combined. However, then you can have it broken up. Again, this is using that concept of views, where you can come here and then show all of those elements filtered by that specific project. And then you also can have a master project list so that everything ties to it. So for example here, all of this is the web portal build. And you'll notice I have it listed on all these components. So I have it here for issue tracking, for that project, for this one. And if I want to see some more information about that web portal build project, I can click on it, and it shows me who the company is, when we started it, when our completion date is. So you can have lists that tie together, so that you can have a list of tasks, pull and tie to your project list. We have a client that did this, that does a lot of kind of timeshare and property rentals, and they wanted to be able to have a list of all their available properties and then tie that to a list of potential clients. And so by doing that connection between lists, you can be working with a client and you can tie it to a certain property, and you can pop that up, and then you can see the details about that property from the other list because they're tied together.
Right. You know, I get in the habit when I talk about SharePoint project management of saying that it's Microsoft Project Lite. And it is. It has fewer features than Microsoft Project does. And that is pretty accurate. But it also handles some types of projects a lot more effectively than Project would. And I'm thinking primarily of collaborative projects where
Absolutely.
there are a lot of people working on the same project at the same time, and there's a lot of going back and forth. And that's something that SharePoint handles collaboration so much better than Project does. Project does really well where there's one guy who's assigned. He's the project manager. He's the lead person, and he has to go through and create the Gantt charts and that kind of stuff. And it's a great application for that kind of thing. But if you have projects where there's 4 or 5 stakeholders, and then there's a bunch of people working on the same thing, and it's maybe it's a broader, longer-term project where it doesn't really fit into the same project management bucket, then this is a great way to get those kinds of things accomplished.
Yeah, it does. A lot of the visual things that you have in Microsoft Project, you have here as well. For example, if I go to this task list, this is the whole concept of views. Here we're looking at a task list with a timeline, but if you want a Gantt chart view like you'd have in Microsoft Project, I'm going to come here and change the view of this task list, and very quickly I have a Gantt chart view. And I can even relate things, so I know that things are here related with these blue lines. So I can actually relate things as well from project to project. So again, just similar to working in Project, you have some of those same features.
And we won't get too far into this in this webinar. However, we've had a number of clients that want client portals. They want, this is great for internal visibility for the team working on the project, but they also want some of this information available to the client so they know where the project is going. And there are ways of making portions of this or other content available just to those external users who don't necessarily have an email address on your domain. And they can still get to it and get the information they need, and maybe be able to track that, and that reduces some of the back and forth email chatter that happens on projects.
Yeah, we had an architectural firm that was doing this, and that was, they had lots of vendors that were involved in their projects, and they wanted the vendors to be able to log in and see specific stuff as far as the project timeline and documents, and then they wanted the clients to be able to see another subset of stuff, so we could create that. And that goes to that whole security and permissions thing with SharePoint, is you can lock down security and permissions so that you can allow your clients or your vendors to see specific components, but not everything.
Yep, we definitely, portals seem to make a whole lot of sense for this SharePoint, and it's come up quite a number of times for us. So that's project management. I'm sure there's going to be questions about that because it's definitely a useful thing. And, we see it a lot, but there's a lot to it, definitely.
High demand. So one thing that ties in with project management and other things in companies is workflows.
So we'll get back to the workflows page here.
All right.
We've seen workflows and business intelligence seem to be the two biggest things that we talk about most frequently with clients. SharePoint is a great way of storing information on an intranet site, but it also has a way of routing documents and information through several people in a workflow kind of setting. Some examples of this are vacation requests, where an employee usually is going to fill out a manual form, a sheet of paper, and hand it to their manager, and that manager writes something on it and then hands it to the human resources person, and that person types something into a computer and then hands it over to the accounting person, and that's a manual process for vacation requests, and we still see those. Every other client we talk to has something like that going on. Manager approvals. We've had incident requests that we've worked on. Time being recorded. How much time did you spend on each of these projects? These are examples of workflows that could be automated using SharePoint. So with SharePoint, the way that it works is you would be able to, say, load a document up into a SharePoint site. And
Or a form.
Yeah,
we do input that forms too.
One of those two things would kick off the workflow. So I'll talk through a vacation request. Let's say Mal is looking for a vacation request. And so he goes into the SharePoint site and he fills out a form. And as soon as he hits submit, either an email or a task is generated, and that email or task goes to his direct manager. And so his direct manager takes a look at that and decides to approve it or decline it, whatever he feels like. And he's going to send that on to the Human Resources Director. So that bit of information, or that document, that form, whatever it is, gets passed down to the Human Resources Director. And then she or he makes the recording in and makes sure the hours are available for the vacation request. And once that person's satisfied and approved it, it can go over to the accounting department, which might be useful for auditing his paycheck or that kind of thing. So Kramer's going to take care of it there. After that, the work is finished, one of the big benefits of using a workflow in SharePoint is that that process is completely handled within SharePoint, which means that you, first of all, it's easier to use, easier to maintain, but it's documented, so you can actually know who approved what and when they approved it. And if some project has gone through but it's not been approved, you can figure out where it's stuck in the process and say, go over and knock on Elaine's door and say, why haven't you approved this vacation request yet? It's also consistent. The same workflow is going to be handled the exact same way every time, and it's managed. So all of the hassle and stress that comes with making sure that all of the balls that are up in the air are landing where they're supposed to be, that's greatly reduced by having dashboards and having other kind of visibility into where that process
so you can visually see where something breaks down or where someone hasn't completed a task. It's a lot easier to manage all of that in a workflow than, gosh, I wonder if I got this from this person and I need to follow up.
Right, and well, and spotting trends too.
Mm-hmm.
If it's, say, an incident report, it's easy to find out which employee is having more incident reports than others, and that might lead to a decision you need to make about that employee, or some training or help for that employee. Or it might be a matter of looking through and saying, where are these workflows typically getting bogged down? So if a client request is taking 4 days and you want that client request to go down to 2 days, you can look at it and say, okay, this person is overworked because they're not getting their work done on time, so we need to get more help and resources to that person.
Absolutely. Great.
So that's workflow.
So let's talk a little bit about SharePoint installation. So if you're thinking about going to SharePoint, there are a lot of places where they can go wrong. We get a lot of phone calls from clients that say, we installed SharePoint, no one's using it, it's not working, please help. So we'll talk through what the 7 key tips are to ensure that your installation of SharePoint goes successfully. The first one is you don't know SharePoint. What usually happens is SharePoint is delegated to the IT department. It's software. So what happens is they say, okay, your IT, install it. And what happens is even an internal IT pro, when they're tasked with setting it up and managing it, it's a complex program. It involves a lot more components than just your regular IT person usually uses. You have to know SQL, IIS, DNS, Active Directory, Exchange, Search, all these things, as well as all the idiosyncrasies about SharePoint, because you can't just do an out-of-the-box install. Microsoft, of course, didn't make it that easy. So you have to know all these best practices and the special ways that you need to configure things. For example, are you going to put PDFs in SharePoint? If you're going to do that, then you have to do some special configuration on the back end because they won't play together automatically. How do you want search set up? How do you need indexing set up? So those are all things that you need to consider and that need to be set up initially correctly. The next thing is that where installations go wrong is that it's built in a vacuum. What happens is, again, it's given to IT because it's a software product, and they go, great, I build it for us and set it up so we can use it. The problem is IT doesn't know what every department needs. They can't guess and figure that out. So it really needs to be given to the departments to drive the design of it. IT needs to set the server and get that ready, but it really needs to be given to the hands of the users to actually create and build it. You also need to consider the user experience, and you need to build it for an intuitive usability. Because a SharePoint site's built, it has to be built correctly with the user experience in mind. Just because you build it doesn't mean they're going to come. If it's more complicated or takes longer to use and figure out than old methods, what's going to happen is users are going to resent the site, and they're actually going to bypass it altogether, and they'll go back to their old methods or workarounds. So you need to have best practices in mind when you build it. For example, getting users to their content in 3 clicks or less, keeping things above the fold, all these best practices that need to be put in place to make a successful implementation. So another place where installations go wrong is that you thought training was optional. So a lot of companies go, oh, we'll put it up, we'll figure it out, we'll have them go online and search some things. I talk to clients all the time that never got training. They hate SharePoint. That's all I hear is how awful SharePoint is, how tough it is to use, how I don't like it. I talk to clients that get training and they love SharePoint because they know all the cool things it can do.
The funny thing is, SharePoint is ostensibly a web page, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everyone uses the internet all day long. Everyone's on it all day long, right? But the thing is, SharePoint is being used for this critical function of managing information, and for some companies, it does everything for them. It's the application that is used. And when you have that much stress put on this program, if users are uncomfortable in finding data, or they're just unsure of if the data that they do find is accurate or if it's being saved properly, then that can make them feel uncomfortable, and that encourages them to use the old tried and true methods instead of going into this. So we do training really on every level, where we train the site managers who are going to go through and create content, and we also train the end users in terms of how to access the content and interact with the site so they can take full advantage of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually training goes further than just making sure employees know how to use it. It helps with the whole change management and how they actually adopt the new platform and how much they embrace it and how much it'll cut down on all the help desk calls in the long run. So another place where installation goes wrong is there was no change management planning. You know, people hate change, and if you're the one who brings SharePoint to the organization, you're already going to be the bad guy. Now, even if you're just upgrading from SharePoint 2010 to 2013, employees will feel like they have added more work on them, you know, that you've given them more to do because they have to learn how to use a new interface. And they're not going to see the advantages of the upgrade. They'll see it as another thing that the IT department forced them to do. However, there's some key things to make it less painful. You know, get them involved before the change happens to share ideas and get them to be champions for this new upgrade or new software. You know, show them new features and previews prior to the upgrade. This gets people excited about things. You also want to keep employees informed with the ongoing progress, you know, different dates or little tidbits. Because if they feel like you're keeping them in the loop, then they're not going to feel like you're springing a change on them. Another place where installations go wrong is that you ignored making a new architecture. So I have a lot of people that say, great, we have SharePoint. I'm just going to take all of our shared folder drives and drag them into a document library and we're good, right? The problem with doing that, it's like building a house on top of another old house foundation. You want to start fresh. You want to use the new features. If you just drag your old file system into the new SharePoint site, why bother? So you're garbage in, garbage out. You're not going to see any of the new benefits that you have. So you want to make sure that you take advantage of all the cool new things that come with SharePoint and build a good, solid infrastructure.
We see that a lot. We see a lot of customers who will go through and they'll just simply load in the documents or load in the contact list that they've always had or the public calendar, that kind of thing. And it doesn't make any sense because why would you go to the trouble and expense of deploying SharePoint if you weren't interested in using SharePoint? So we can go through and there's a lot of oohs and ahs when we talk about metadata and how quickly we can find documents, and that is something that's a real benefit to end users. And if you talk about change management, getting people excited about using the program, showing them how quickly they can find their documents and collaborate information and getting them trained on all those kinds of things, that definitely helps out with it.
Absolutely, yeah. And the last place where installations go wrong is there's no governance and planning. Now, this doesn't have to be overdone or difficult. People hear this and they go, oh, that's this time-consuming long thing. But if you want to do some basic planning and governance, it's going to help ensure that your site grows the way you want it to. So this should be basic guidance for the migration. So how are we going to migrate stuff in? You know, how are the end users going to use it? This goes to like, are we going to lock down the shared drive or move everything in? Just those simple things that you need to lay out. You also want to find out what are the different permissions, you know, and who can edit what, or what types of data can and should be stored in SharePoint. Should my letter to mom be put in there, or should I only be putting certain kind of company information? Are there certain naming conventions you want to use? How are you going to use versions? Because maybe we don't need versions for all libraries. Is there going to be an archive plan? So those are just a few things that would go into the whole governance and planning.
Yeah, it's an interesting area too. We see some companies that overdo governance. It's extremely strict, where users, really very power users, can't create sites, can't create new content, and everything has to go through the IT department. And we're happy to support those kinds of deployments if that's what you choose. We would recommend not, though, since it's the power of SharePoint is putting that innovation into the hands of the users who know where the problems are. So it's much better if you give them access to some of the more advanced tools. Now, on the other hand, I've also talked to a number of companies who over several years will end up with thousands of sub-sites, and they have to migrate all those things into a new version of SharePoint. And I'm thinking of one customer in particular who said they went through and audited them, and almost none of them were being touched. They hadn't been looked at since they were first created. So as a governance plan, you do have to maybe create some standards around Things like don't create a subsite unless you're really going to use it, and make sure that it's going to be something that's effective and helpful for the organization instead of just bloat.
Absolutely. So lastly, just to kind of review all that, the components of a successful installation entail design, which is governance, planning, architecture, the user interface, your branding. So do you want to make it look different than the standard SharePoint default? What kind of corporate image do you want in the governance around that? So do we want to restrict users from certain fonts and colors? Training. So that's everything as Stephen was talking about, from end user training to the power user to the actual IT administrator. And then lastly, IT administration. So everything from the server to security to how backup's going to work to integrations to the lovely, quarterly updates that Microsoft releases on SharePoint. Installing those correctly, if Microsoft pushes them out and you don't have someone to install them correctly, that can also give you challenges with your sites. It's all managing all of that stuff.
And that also can't be ignored with an Office 365 installation, because
Correct.
Office 365, that's the Microsoft's version of SharePoint, or SharePoint Online, it's also commonly called if you don't have the Office suite to go along with it. A lot of people assume that they can just deploy that, and then, it takes care of itself, and IT doesn't need to be involved with that. And that's to some extent true. You're able to do that. However, if you want to do some of the more advanced features in terms of things like BI, searching, some integration work, then IT definitely does need to be involved with it. And there actually is a lot of maintenance work that has to be done just to make sure those connections stay fresh and working. So it's something also to consider for an on-premise solution versus a cloud solution, no matter how you're hosting the system. So that completes it, I guess. That talks through our SharePoint 2013 webinar. I will follow up with all of you guys and send out emails. We've actually recorded, this is our third SharePoint webinar we've done over the last year or so. So I'll send out links to recordings of the previous two webinars so you guys can see. Business Intelligence, for example, is one of them. And then 2013's New Features was also a webinar we ran. It was kind of similar to this, but I'll send out links to those. And then also, I'd love to reach out and talk to you guys about setting up a private demonstration if that's useful for you, or talking about how SharePoint could apply for your business. And I've been through a number of these conversations with a very wide range of companies, and we're usually able to spot some very useful things SharePoint could do for a company, ways that it actually solves business problems, as opposed to being just kind of a tool for a tool's sake, or a system for a system's sake, is what I want to say. So my information is right there, but do look for an email from me here shortly. And also get in touch with Jenny, too, if you have any questions from her.
Absolutely. Anything we can help you with. I know it's a huge project, and if you're thinking about going to it, I'm sure you have a lot of questions. So we'll actually answer some questions now. If anybody has questions, feel free to type them into the questions section there on your web panel, and then we would be happy to answer them for you.
Let me bring this up, too. There's a list of our upcoming classes in SharePoint. We have a designer class coming up as early as next week, and then a workflows class, which talks about how to use SharePoint Designer to create workflows for it, and then some level 1 and level 2 classes. That's where you're going to want to start if you've not used SharePoint before, and then an administrator class, which is going to be a technical class for IT professionals and the like. So I do have a question here about integration with Office. This is actually a pretty common question for us, and we'll talk through that. SharePoint does integrate very well with Office. You're able to, for example, if you have a calendar on a SharePoint site, you can integrate that into Microsoft Office very easily, and that allows you to, well, it's like another calendar listed in Outlook, and you check the box, and it appears right next to your calendar, too. So a lot of people interact with the calendars on SharePoint without ever opening up the intranet site.
Yeah, any component in SharePoint that is an Outlook feature, for example, a contact list, a task list, a calendar, all of those things you can connect to Outlook directly, so that you don't even have to log into SharePoint to work with it. Once you connect it to Outlook, they all appear under your other tasks or your other calendars or your your other contacts. And so you can actually copy from your personal contacts in Outlook and drag them and drop them right into the SharePoint contacts within Outlook, so that the whole company can keep a shared contact list updated. Or with the calendar appointments, you can drag calendar appointments from SharePoint onto your own calendar or vice versa, or look at them side by side or overlay them. So all that integrates, as well as all of the Excel and Word and the documents. What happens is when you load a document in a SharePoint library, any properties or metadata you created for that library are automatically then tagged to that document. They now live with those properties. And any list in Excel, you can in SharePoint, you can quickly export to Excel. So if I have a list of, we were looking at the sales goals and forecasts on the demo site, I could export that into Excel and I could do my own analysis of it. And then, and my own charts and graphs. Or I could take, let's say I have a contact list of 5,000 contacts that I downloaded from Salesforce and I want to put them into SharePoint. Download them in an Excel spreadsheet and then you can dump them and import them right into SharePoint in a couple mouse clicks and have it create a list for you in SharePoint.
We also see a lot of customers who want to be able to access the documents in SharePoint with, file opener or the button open, and that's something too. We can also actually map out the SharePoint drive and be able to get access to those documents so that some people can open up a document within SharePoint without ever opening up the SharePoint site. That's definitely something that's very useful for a lot of customers.
There's another question here on what kind of files can you store in SharePoint. So you can basically store any kind of files in SharePoint. You can put PDFs in there, you can put AutoCAD files, any of that stuff will store in SharePoint. If it's an executable like QuickBooks, that needs to launch a whole QuickBooks program, probably better not to store it in SharePoint. You can put the data file in there, but you wouldn't be able to put the whole application software in there. Also, as far as size, we get a lot of questions on size limits. The default size limit in the SharePoint document library is 50 megs, but that's just the default. So if you decide you want to up that because you have huge AutoCAD files, no problem. You just need to go in on the server side, so IT would do that, and they can up the file size for you.
So there's kind of a longer question about deployment strategy in terms of, it sounds like what are some methodologies for deploying SharePoint and launching it within an organization. There are a couple ways that we've done this in the past where we've one strategy is to work with the IT department and with a group of power users or managers within the company, and we just go through and we create the SharePoint site, the foundation, of course, and then we find out a couple of kind of what we call killer apps, so ways that groups within the company are going to really love SharePoint, problems that they've had for years that's installed, and then we create specific solutions that address those issues and launch it to that pilot group, a small group of people. And then they start using this, and they love the workflow, they love the document library, whatever it is that we created, and they start to kind of play around with it a little bit and innovate and figure out what that next level of development is going to look like. And then we go through and we continue to work with that group, and then maybe they, over lunch, start talking to another department within SharePoint, or within the company, rather. And then we start working with that other company, one of the other problems that they have. But if you start from the perspective of finding a series of killer apps, then that is a great way to prove SharePoint is a very useful tool because you're starting with your best foot forward. And then once people are using it for their vacation requests, for their accounting forms, for the hundreds of things they might be using it for, then moving into a document management application, moving it to the front of the company, that's really going to be a lot easier to do in terms of change management. We've seen that strategy a number of times. We've also had this strategy that's been very useful for us where we first, of course, create the foundation for it, make sure it's all effective. And then we'll get a group of the project leads or the department leads into the room, and we run them through a couple of classes. We run them through the first class, which is a SharePoint Level 1 class. Maybe they go through SharePoint Level 2, so they get exposed to all the things that SharePoint can do and how easy it is to make changes to it. And then on a third day or a second day, depending on the client, we'll actually do a workshop where before they forget everything, before they get back to their office and get inundated with emails and the business of the day, they're able to sit down and talk to one another and the instructor and say, how are we going to use this, each of us independently in our departments, going to use this to be more effective. And that workshop day is great. They come out of it with real work products, so they like spending the time doing it. They've applied it immediately, and they come out of it with a SharePoint site that's well on its way to being very well adopted. So we've seen those two methodologies for it. We've also, we get requests for a lot of project management kinds of things, and that's very common for us. Client portals, we replace a lot of FTP sites, and it just seems to be kind of unique for each of the clients.
And there's another question real quick here. How do you know what type of SharePoint or version of SharePoint to put in, hosted or not hosted? There's a lot of questions around that, and we're happy to talk to anyone, on a one-off basis because everyone's environment's different. But there are lots of iterations of SharePoint. There's everything from Foundations, which is free, believe it or not. If you have a small business server, that software is free to, and then it's just getting the installation, the design put together, all the way up to an enterprise version. And if you do that on your own server, it can be some expensive licensing costs, but that's where you get all the features. So if you want to integrate it with other databases, or you want all the business intelligence features, if you want a web portal where you can just make it your internet site. So it has a lot of those more full-blown things. Or if you're a smaller company, it might be worth it to do just hosted. And even with hosted, you can get a lot of the full-blown features of enterprise. There's a little bit more limitations with hosted. For example, you can't have more than 5,000 documents per library. You just need like more libraries, or per list. So some ways you can break stuff up. But pretty much then you can get the full functionality for a lesser cost if you don't have as large of a company. So there's lots of different ways to do it. Just depends on what your company needs are.
Question here about types of browsers, and that leads into mobility. So we'll go through that too. For the browsers, so with 2013, SharePoint 2013, they've expanded the support for Chrome and Firefox as well as Internet Explorer. Now, that being said, Internet Explorer is Microsoft, SharePoint's Microsoft, so that's going to be the best program to use when you interact with SharePoint. However, with Chrome and Firefox, you still do have access to it, and Safari as well. You can still interact with the site, download documents, that kind of thing. It just every once in a while we keep discovering these little glitches, things that don't work quite so well in those other programs. So the support's good, it's not perfect.
Yeah, they'll only guarantee everything works without you because, Microsoft only wants to play with Microsoft.
That's really right. Now, we also get a lot of questions about mobile access. People are in the field, they need to be able to fill out a form in the field on the SharePoint site and have it reported back to headquarters. That's something that with 2013 has also been greatly improved. So you're able to interact with the site. It does have a phone or a tablet, iPhone, Android, Microsoft phone, Windows phone, friendly kind of interface for it. So you're able to go through and interact with the site and get that information from out in the field too.
Great. I think that's it for questions.
I think so. My information is up there on the screen, so please do reach out if you have any questions at all. I'm very happy to help. And we appreciate you joining us here today. And
Thanks for your time.
I hope it was useful. I hope you got a lot out of it, and we hope to hear from you guys soon.
Have a good afternoon.